Thank you and good morning everybody. Welcome and thank you for attending this very important event and announcement. Welcome to the Dubbo Office of the Inspector General of Water Compliance. This is one of several that we have located throughout the Murray-Darling Basin. It's part of my commitment to have officers in the basin, being a visible presence for an independent integrity agency. So, the integrity of the Murray-Darling Basin and its water resources management is paramount. Water is this country's most finite natural resource. This is one basin. What happens in the north affects the south, and vice versa. Ultimately, what affects the basin ripples across our nation's environment, their communities, culture and economy. Australians rely on water for individual livelihoods across agriculture, food and fibre production. Water is the lifeblood, preserving fragile and irreplaceable environmental ecosystems, some of which are considered at risk or endangered. And these are all dependent on the sustainability of the basin and its water supply. Recognising the need for greater integrity, trust and transparency and accountability in the basin, the Australian Government earlier this year approved $28.6 million in funding increase over 4 consecutive years of operation of the Inspector General's Office. This included dedicated funding and resources to bolster the role of the Inspector General and to support one of my critical functions and powers, that of inquiry. Inquiry gives me the ability to take a deeper dive into issues and to get to the bottom of them. And inquiry gives me legislated powers to thoroughly interrogate the facts, interview witnesses and gather evidence to inform my decision making. This applies to all basin jurisdictions, all governments, including the Commonwealth. This is why, as Australia's first Inspector General for Water Compliance, I am today launching my first inquiry. This inquiry will specifically look at the $180 million Northern Basin Toolkit. This is a significant Australian Government program that was designed to improve water management in the upper part of the Murray-Darling Basin, which covers the lower part of Queensland and the most northern parts of New South Wales. This inquiry will look at all parties involved in this program to see if they are meeting their commitments and acting with the highest standards of accountability when it comes to the management and integrity of this precious natural resource. The Toolkit is a program that aims to enhance the protection and delivery of environmental water. It's there to maintain a sustainable fish population through improvements to fish movements and protection from extraction. It's there to support critical river systems and wetlands across the Northern Basin, an area which includes several major river catchments, which include the Barwon-Darling, the Condamine-Ballon, the Gwydir, the Macquarie Castle-Ray and the Nemoy catchments. My decision to launch an inquiry today into the Toolkit comes after careful consideration of several factors. My predecessor to this role, Mick Keelty, as the Northern Basin Commissioner at the time, was tasked to oversight the Toolkit, and in his very first report in 2019, he called out the lack of progress. The responsibility of monitoring progress and holding those responsible for it naturally transferred to me when I became the Inspector General in August of 2021. Crucially, there can be no longer any delays without transparent reasons. There can no longer be any delays and a lack of accountability that potentially jeopardises the future of the basin. Many Australians will remember the 2019 fish death events in the lower Darling. The sheer sizes and confronting images of those events were shared across our national and international media. One of the recommendations from an independent review of those events was that the respective governments should set an aggressive timeline for the delivery of the toolkit. These recommendations were in early 2019. Well, we're almost at the end of 2024, and it's time to check on the progress of those recommendations in implementing those key measures. The toolkit originated from a review of the ecological, social and economic impacts of water recovery in the Northern Basin, which was undertaken by the Murray-Darling Basin Authority from 2012 to 2016. Following the review, the MDBA recommended the water recovery target for the Northern Basin could be reduced by 70 gigalitres, provided that the Australian, New South Wales and Queensland government agreed to the toolkit and its measures as a package of environmental measures. While the adjustment to the recovery target passed into law in 2018, it appears there has been little substantive progress in the last 6 years to implement several of the toolkit measures, particularly those involving critical infrastructure works. Those delays in part appear to be driven by a lack of consequence for the respective agencies charged with the successful delivery of the toolkit. The original deadline for the toolkit's implementation was June of this year, 2024. In August of 23, this deadline was extended through to the 31st of December 2026. So through this inquiry, I will provide an independent, transparent and thorough examination of the status of the implementation of the toolkit. Under its terms of reference, this inquiry will look at, amongst other things, 4 key issues. Number 1, the extent the toolkit has been implemented, including progress achieved, outcomes attained, and the work that is left to do. Secondly, the extent to which the Commonwealth, New South Wales and Queensland governments have implemented their commitments and how much money of the $180 million has been spent. Thirdly, any reasons for the non-delivery of all toolkit measures by the original June 2024 deadline and the extension that's been granted through to the 31st of December 2026. And finally, the effectiveness, and importantly, the effectiveness of the government's arrangements and the agreement to deliver the toolkit. I've always been a strong advocate for hearing the views of local communities, and this will be more important than ever regarding this inquiry. Today, I strongly urge any interested or affected parties to come forward, speak up and have your say. Outside of a voluntary submission process we have established, I do have the power to compel information. This means specific information is required to be given, and if a person fails to comply, they may be liable to prosecution. While I cannot predict the inquiry's findings, it is likely that valuable lessons will emerge, which can be used by all governments responsible for the implementation of the remaining elements of the Basin Plan. My inquiry will not be a witch hunt. If I see things that are done well, I will highlight them. If I see things that are done poorly, I will call them out. And I won't have any hesitation in doing so. Can I please introduce as Acting Assistant Inspector General Sheridan de Croof, in charge of my oversight branch, who will speak to the process of this inquiry. Thank you, Sheridan.
Thank you, Troy, and good morning. I am leading the team that will assist the Inspector General to carry out the Northern Basin Toolkit inquiry. The Inspector General has staff working across the Murray-Darling Basin, including team members situated in the Northern Basin. The Inspector General is seeking feedback from interested parties, particularly individuals, government agencies and organisations with direct involvement in the implementation of the Northern Basin Toolkit. We are very keen to hear from a broad range of stakeholders. The inquiry will rely heavily on the quality of the engagement that the Inspector General receives. Submissions are now open until the 29th of November 2024 and can be made in writing via our website. The website is inquiry.igwc.gov.au. As the Inspector General mentioned, he also has powers under the Water Act to compel the provision of information and require individuals to appear before him to answer questions. To maintain the integrity and ensure we receive reliable information, the Inspector General will not comment on the specifics of an ongoing inquiry. At the conclusion of the inquiry, the report will contain findings and recommendations and will be provided to the Australian Minister for Environment and Water in mid-2025. We will keep the public informed of our timing as the inquiry progresses. Thank you.
Thank you, Sheridan. You've now been provided with the context as to why I'm undertaking this inquiry. You've now also been given an overview of how that inquiry is going to be conducted and run. Just repeat that submissions to inquiry.igwc.gov.au, we welcome those submissions and we're very happy to take any and all of your questions.
When you mentioned the fish deaths in 2019 in Darling, do you expect, because of the slow progress, that there could be potentially more of these?
This is an inquiry essentially about environmental outcomes. I don't have the scientific background to comment on the current risk that faces the Lower Darling and other areas of the system. They're questions best directed to the experts in the MDBA, the Commonwealth Environmental Water Holders Office and in state agencies. But this toolkit is designed to achieve environmental outcomes, and the fact that they haven't all been implemented is the core reason for our inquiry, to make sure those things aren't consequences in the future.
At the time that the extension to December 2026 was made, what were the reasons given then for why there was needed to be that extension?
That's part of what we'll be seeking to understand through...
The extension was granted without there needing to be a kind of outline of reasons for that?
There was a process that was undertaken to grant that extension, but we will be examining the reasons, rationale and decision making behind that extension to properly understand it, so we can then provide information back regarding the status and findings from every other bit of information that we may receive during the hearing.
And just could you talk a little bit more about who you think might be the interested or affected parties that could come forward that you'd be interested in hearing from?
They're vast. Anyone that has a stake in the future of the Murray-Darling Basin, we expect we would hear from. Obviously, landholders, locals within the Northern Basin Toolkit area where the measures and projects are planned are likely. The agencies that are involved in the management of the Northern Basin Toolkit are likely and potentially submission providers. So we don't know. It's wide open. We're not restricting anyone from submitting. It can be just individuals who have a view, but we welcome any and all submissions.
And how big is apart from yourself, who else will make up part of that inquiry panel?
Yeah, so the inquiry under the Water Act is led by me, so I will be conducting the inquiry myself, and I will be assisted by the team that my Assistant Inspector General, Sheridan has put together.
And will you have hearings and whatnot? You'll have these in-person hearings, same as any kind of parliamentary level inquiry?
Likely, but all those decisions as to number of hearings, types of hearings, locations, all that will be decided after the submission date. So we have a full body of information before us to make those decisions to make it the most efficient and effective program of potential hearings, and to articulate and highlight who would be on that witness list.
Why has there been so many delays with this toolkit?
That's the inquiry's going to give you those answers. That's the whole purpose. I'm not going to preempt. Anecdotally, I've heard from community. I've heard from various government agencies and organisations for various reasons, but I'm not going to preempt that. That's what the inquiry is going to, on an evidence base, provide answers to.
And you said you foreshadow, without giving too much away, as to what you may find in the inquiry. This will cover all levels of government?
Yes, it will. It'll cover every level of government.
Okay.
No other questions? Thank you for your time. Really appreciate you being here today.
Thank you.
Thank you.